Welcome everyone to our Pluto in Aquarius webinar. As you can see on your screen, this is going to be part one. I will have multiple parts to this. I don't have any specific timing on it, but because Pluto's going to be in Aquarius for 20 years and it's going to go back into Capricorn, 2 retrograde cycles, there's a lot that's going to unfold here. And as I was prepping for this one, I thought, oh, Kimberly, how did you ever think you'd get everything in 2 hours? So if we go over, um, thank you for understanding. And remember, you'll have this recording to refer to afterwards, and the PDF link that Leroy mentioned, you'll be able to watch the video, you'll be able to listen to it audio, and you'll be able to download the audio if you want to walk the dog, as we joke. So you'll have multiple ways to refer to this, and anybody who's familiar with my evolutionary astrology presentations, I teach astrology a lot, and so a little hard to get the teacher out of me. I'll try and go over some of the most basic stuff a little faster, but if you're new to astrology or even evolutionary astrology, again, you'll have these slides to go back and refer to for your own pursuing. So here's our housekeeping slide with our blue hyperlinks that will go directly to our website when you get the PDFs. And you can see the various ways you can study evolutionary astrology with us. Probably one of the things that I would recommend is Leroy and I, Media Monk and Star Lady, have been doing our free new moon, full moon audio podcasts for, oh gosh, way over a decade. We might be going almost 15 years. I lose track of time with this, but highly recommend those if you want a little more detailed information on what's going on in the stars in the sky on a bi-monthly basis. And so just a little reminder for us, Pluto's not the only planet that has been through Aquarius. How many remember Jupiter back in Aquarius 21? One of the archetypes of Aquarius is contagion, be it a physical contagion like a virus, or be it a psychological contagion like a collective mindset. We had Jupiter in Aquarius in 21, Saturn was there 21, 22. Saturn just a couple of weeks ago went into Pisces, and so these two social and conscious archetypes have been kind of setting the stage for Pluto, but Pluto's going to be the powerhouse here. And as you can see on your screen, it's going to have 2 retrograde cycles from Aquarius back into Capricorn. We will talk about those moving along. Here's another archetype that's pretty natural to all astrology. Evolutionary astrology, or EA, specifically teaches it. And this is about astrological timing or evolution, involution. And they're basically 2 types. There's non-cataclysmic, how we live our lives day by day, month by month, etc. How we evolve through that slow, uniform process and recognize new things in our lives, new desires, new actions. That is the more common type, and it is interspersed with what we call cataclysmic evolution, which is when there's an intense life-altering change, something someone forcefully removed. We lose our job, we lose our partner doesn't want to be with us anymore. It can also include collective stuff like major earth events and accidents. Many of us will feel that when the coronavirus emerged on the planet, it was pretty cataclysmic for everyone on the planet. And so both of these types of evolution are really just the evolving forces overcoming resisting forces. In other words, we can sometimes resist change because we've built up a world that exists and it helps us feel secure. And the future, many times, is insecure because it's unknown. And so if we're in resistance, sooner or later, evolving forces are going to have the final word. What we have to watch is the tendency to go back to that past after the cataclysm. That is one of the reasons why evolution can take so long. It's one of the reasons why history repeats itself. We're not always guaranteed to just be moving forward. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 1 step forward, 2 steps back. So it takes courage and willpower to evolve on an individual basis. Now, in evolutionary astrology, Pluto, Scorpio, 8th house, same archetype. The planet sign house is the same archetype in EA. They're representative of what we call a soul, that immutable consciousness that exists from life to life, that incarnates again, expanding in consciousness. Now, all souls have a dual desire nature to separate from that which created us, and separating desires are anything, everything, new lover, job, a new car, whatever. And then there's that desire to return to that which created us, or the desire to know source energy. And so all souls go through countless lifetimes exhausting or separating desire nature and expanding in consciousness again through each experience. Now, last desire to be exhausted, last separating desire is the sexual desire, procreation of the species. Only about 1 or 2% of souls on the planet have exhausted that desire because, again, it leads to the survival of the species. But eventually we exhaust that, and the only desire left within our soul is the desire to merge back with source. That's a pretty long journey right there, and it tends to take many of us quite a while to do it. And as we do in EA, we have what are called the different evolutionary states of consciousness within souls. And we do not look at these states as better than or less than. They're just expanding circles of awareness. And the evolutionary state of consciousness is not known through the birth chart alone. It is something that you literally have to observe and correlate with an actual individual, or observe and correlate through their behaviors in public life if they're a more well-known figure. Consensus is the smallest awareness. It is approximately 7 out of 10 souls. They cannot live out the space-time that they live in. This is where they really desire to be secure and resist evolution, yet even they evolved. About 2 out of 10 are individuating. I'm going to think for myself what I believe, how I want to participate. And then approximately 1 out of 10 are spirituating, understanding those universal, timeless, natural principles, or what EA will call natural law. And this is what we would call perhaps the mystical side of any religion or belief system, organized religion belonging more in consensus, and individuated being all over the place, including atheism, and I don't believe anything at all. So this is all very germane to our souls, which again is represented by Pluto. And so here's the dynamics if you're studying astrology to look at where the soul is coming from, the karmic dynamic, and where the soul is intending to evolve, the evolutionary intent. All of us are born with Pluto in a sign. That represents the generation we were born into, and that Pluto sign falls into a specific house, and that's going to be the karmic nature specific to us. Same thing happens with the polarity. The opposite sign is the lessons that our generation is working through. And that polarity house is the individual lessons that we're working through. Now, this karmic dynamic and evolutionary intent can also exist on a collective level. Groups of souls incarnating specific to certain times, learning certain lessons. There are the souls who incarnated as Jews in Europe during World War II with the intent that if we saw something that awful, human consciousness would expand and say, never again. Well, that came about, but it's receding into the unconsciousness and we're forgetting. And so, do we repeat it again? Another place, another time. Just one example for you there. What happens is transiting Pluto by sign and then specific house for each of us will represent the environment through which we are currently evolving our natal Pluto soul archetype. So Pluto transits the sign of the zodiac. We're just finishing up 15 years of Capricorn, getting ready for 20 of Aquarius. We have generational lessons of Pluto and Capricorn that we've been talking about for 15 years. Capricorn and its polarity Cancer rule animus, anima, or male and female. Oh, have there been any gender lessons coming up for the last 15 years? We'll all then move through those in an individual way, wherever that transiting Pluto by sign is in a specific house for us. Another little tidbit for you, and we'll look at this with the USA chart slides, but in 2022, transiting Pluto returned to late Capricorn, which was where it was on July 4th, 1776, when we had the birth of these United States. So we as a collective, thank you international listeners for my perspective as a US citizen. But for the first time in the USA's history, our country has been going through a death and rebirth of our collective soul identity. And because it's, Pluto is 248 years through the zodiac, we don't have this death and rebirth over a 6-month time period. I'm fond of saying we are going through it this entire decade. It's been leading up since last decade. We'll even be birthing our new identity into the 2030s and beyond. Now, Pluto has a very eccentric orbit because it doesn't follow the plane of the ecliptic where the sun and most of the planets appear to go. It is off at an angle, so it will take anywhere from 10 to 32 years to go through signs of the zodiac. And interestingly, its shortest transit is its rulership, which is Scorpio. It only takes, 10, 12 years to go through there. We are having Pluto starting to go slower through the signs of the zodiac. And as it starts to lengthen those transits by sign, it means that there are more lessons to learn. It is taking us longer to really get the archetypes of what we are going through. Just briefly, a little astronomy. Pluto's retrograde 5 months or 44% of the year, which means 44% of souls born on the planet are born with Pluto retrograde, trying to throw off their past and a little more energy to do so. A few more things on that when we look at Pluto retrograde. Pluto got kicked out of the planetary lineup back in 2006 and got demoted to a dwarf planet, which is now classified as planets which exist outside of Neptune, and that's called I pronounce it Cooper. I don't know if it's Cooper or Kuiper belt. And so there are a lot of astrologers that are starting to talk about the dwarf planets, as you see listed on your screen. It's not an area of study for me, but this way you kind of know, where are they coming up with those? They expand beyond Neptune's orbit. Pluto has 5 known moons, and here is a picture of Pluto and its largest moon, which again I call Chiron. They almost act like a binary system with each other. And then in Jeffrey Green's original teachings, he says this is what's representative of that dual desire nature to separate and to return. And so I still think that's true, but it now has a bunch of smaller moons. You can see two of them right there in this NASA photograph that was taken some time ago. Collective Pluto astrology. The current Pluto transit cycle was initiated when it first went into Aries. It made one passage, no retrograde. It initiated into Aries back in April of 1822. Again, Pluto's 248 years, 250 years through the zodiac. I had written this up a few moons ago. I thought I'd just leave it up here for you because you can see that the circle can be divided into 4. And when we divide the circle into 3, we call them the modalities, which is mode of action. Cardinal initiates, fixed persevere, mutable adapts. So if we look at Pluto through Libra, Scorpio, Sag, one modality cycle, here's the dates. It was evolving outer relationships and cosmological understanding of life. Libra, Scorpio, Sag. We're now in a modality cycle with Pluto in Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, pretty long. Again, Pluto's transits is lengthening. This is a modality cycle that is encompassing, expanding societal frameworks until society itself must rebirth with Pluto in Aries again, all the way into 2066. Most of us will have come back on the planet by then, if not a couple of times, depending upon what our soul experiences in regards to its lifespan in any given lifetime. So Pluto changing an archetype, which is a sign of the zodiac. Pluto represents death and rebirth in the broadest sense. So anytime Pluto ingresses a new sign, major themes, trends, and patterns are all subject to the death and rebirth test. In other words, old Pluto and Capricorn cycles are dying to give birth to new Pluto and Aquarius cycles. And as we know in natural law, I say this in regards to relationships. Hello is only as good as goodbye. So you want to do your best when a relationship ends to rebirth the new relationships that come along. However, all souls, consensus, individuating, and spirituating, individually and collectively, we can all tend to cling to the past for security reasons. This is what I know. This is how I feel safe. It can make for more dramatic shifts when our souls are unwilling to evolve. However, remember what we said before? Eventually, those evolving forces overcome resisting forces. Capricorn and Aquarius, they're going to come with a 1, 2, 3, 10 punch. Because Capricorn really likes yesterday. Just look at the political energy around you in various countries of the world. And Aquarius really likes tomorrow. Now, Saturn will step into tomorrow, and there are some Aquarius energies that want to go backwards. But in general, they really can represent yesterday and tomorrow. And so this shift of Pluto from Capricorn to Aquarius, and as it goes back and forth for 2 years here, it's going to make for some pretty dramatic shifts on both individual and collective levels. And so how are we going to walk through that as best as possible? Before we do, let me give you dates. Here are the dates that Pluto goes into Aquarius, as we can see. Oh, by the way, happy spring equinox, everybody. We are recording this March 20th, 23, just a couple hours after the sun entered Aries for the new solar year. But here's 23. Pluto goes into Aquarius 2.5 months. Just a pretty short dip. Don't think it won't have its say, though. For those of you who participated last week in Saturn in Pisces, we touched upon the whole banking situation. I will talk to that some more later on today. Again, all three ingresses of Pluto into Aquarius will have their say. Next year, Pluto will be in Aquarius almost 8 months. Then 18 years, the end of 2024, and it will actually dip back into Aquarius 2 decades from now, pretty long time away. But this is what you really want to remember right now. 2.5 months this year, a longer cycle next year. So whatever seed thoughts are going to be happening here, they're going to be expanded upon here, and then the themes will really set in as we move into 2025. So what are those themes? Let's look at the archetype of Aquarius in general for a moment. And again, in EA, the planet, which is Uranus, the sign, which is Aquarius, and the house, which is the 11th house, is one archetype. And EA has always taught that if you can learn the 12 archetypes of the zodiac, Aries through Pisces, then you can extrapolate planet, sign, and house and blend together to do that interpretation. Well, the Aquarius archetype is the individuated unconsciousness. Sun, Moon, Mercury, blah, blah, Jupiter, Saturn, those are all conscious planets. Saturn is the individuated consciousness, the boundaries of what is conscious for ourselves in a space-time medium. 3 traditional outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they will operate unconsciously. So again, Uranus Aquarius 11th is specific to our individuated unconsciousness, our unconscious mind, for ourselves personally, and it contains 3 types of information, past in all its detail, both this life and past lives. It is accessed through spontaneous memories, repeating prior life events, past life regression, hypnotherapy, breath work. There's various ways in which the unconscious past will bounce up into conscious awareness. It also contains the present that is suppressed via Saturn. When there's something in our life we don't want to deal with, we void it. We just pretend it's not there. We can just settle for not making Saturnian efforts, reaching those Saturn Capricorn goals. We can kind of just, again, push it away. I don't want to deal with it. Saturn tries to push it into the unconsciousness. Well, guess what? Uranus Aquarius keeps pushing it back up. There's a real interplay that goes on between Saturn and Uranus here, which, as I said before, Capricorn Aquarius, yesterday, tomorrow. Can you see where that's coming from a little bit now? But this archetype also contains the blueprint of the future. And this is accessed through future-orientated messages. And I'm fond of saying they don't come with a date time stamp. So if they come up once or twice, they're fantasy, wishful thinking, or way down the road into the far future. If you have those future-orientated messages come up on their own again, this is where your own soul, via your individuated unconsciousness, is popping up to say, da-da, this is the direction you need to go. Now, we'll expand upon those in just a moment, but I just wanted to give you this brief introduction. And so Pluto and Aquarius is going to have all 3 types of information coming up into our consciousness. And it's not going to come up in an ABC story-like fashion. We're going to have to just make sense of it all. Oh, geez, there's something from past life that is just triggering the bejeebies out of me, and I just can't quite settle down. Okay, maybe I, need to, do some personal alternative therapeutic work to try and see what it is that wants to surface. And those future oriented messages, you know, same thing. Oh my God, you know, how can I switch jobs when I got to pay the mortgage? But I keep getting that message that it's now time. So Pluto and Aquarius, again, will bring up all three of these. You individually are going to be making sense of them. And if you follow your chart, wherever transiting Pluto Aquarius is by house, that house's archetype is going to be activated by past lives, by what you don't want to deal with, and by how you are trying to evolve that house archetype. You can Google the 12 houses on the internet to help you with that personally. But, you know, this right here is very key to understand. So Pluto in Aquarius is the soul, Pluto's evolution of its individuated unconsciousness. The intent, the big broad intent of the next 20 years of Pluto in Aquarius, to decondition from our past, to liberate ourselves in the present, and to evolve into the future for our own soul. We will, each of us, do this individually, and then we will all do it collectively as we participate in our groups, in our state, our province, in our country, and we'll do it collectively as a human species. We'll do it collectively with all species as we learn to live together on planet Earth through climate change. So Pluto and Aquarius will represent how each of us individually and society, however I just described it, can experience those upsets in our life. You know, Aquarius brings a lightning bolt of information, but it also brings the trauma of something happening. More on that in a bit. Are we going to cling to the past? Are we just going to freeze up and go into paralysis, go into circular thinking, or go catonic, I can't think? Are we going to accept whatever changes in front of us and do our best to move forward? Again, remember, Pluto and Aquarius both represent revolutionary cycles. Pluto's that death and rebirth that brings us metamorphosis. Aquarius is that major transformation, even if it unfolds step by step. When we look at trauma here in a little bit, we can see how sometimes those steps have to be pretty big leaps. So, change is afoot for all of us. But first of all, oops, hold on. I got to get my little, there it is. Okay. And so Pluto in Aquarius, as I said, it's going to be about breaking free from consensus conditioning. Many times that past we have to break free from is quite conditioned by that 7 out of 10 in consensus society. We all have to participate with it unless we're on a stranded island or the Himalayan mountaintops, and then we really might not necessarily evolve because we don't have anybody to interact with. And so Pluto in Capricorn, well, it has been really breaking down a lot of consensus structures. The consensus has been doing its best to keep outmoded structures alive. We'll watch more things break down collectively these next 2 years through these cycles. And so we're not guaranteed that individually and collectively we're going to break free. It's really going to depend upon your emotional security patterns and needs. Are you inwardly secure emotionally? The opposite of Capricorn is Cancer. And so the 15 years that Pluto has been in Capricorn, the Cancer polarity has been asking us to create inner emotional security that helps us have an inner peace, a sense of self-love through any changes in that outer Capricorn world. If we are not working on inner emotional security, we will resist Pluto and Aquarius changes. And depending upon how much we resist, those evolutionary forces can create trauma. So one of the broadest intents of Aquarius, and this is going to be true through all 20 years of Pluto in Aquarius, one of the broadest intents is for traumas of the past, both this life, early childhood, whenever, and traumas from past lives. The broadest intent is for them to resurface into consciousness in order to heal our wounds on every level possible. It's probably about a decade or so ago. Well, it was more right when Pluto first started going into Capricorn. I remember it now. I started training in a past life regression method called deep memory processing. It's a hands-on method. It's not something that's really done over the phone. Deep memory processing, you can Google it, and it was created by a gentleman called Roger Wolger. And his most famous book is Other Lies, Other Selves. He was a Jungian therapist whose clients kept bringing up past life memories, and he went that alternative route. And so it is a method that is just excellent for working through those past life unconscious traumas. And I really feel that Pluto and Aquarius will bring a renaissance of some of what we call our new age or ancient wisdom sciences that will come along. And so past life regression therapy could be very helpful in these next few years, very helpful over the next 2 decades, to help us each work with some of that. I just remembered something that I'm going to make a note. You can look at the PDF slides afterwards. For those of you who don't have easy access to past life regression therapy, I have a I have an unconsciousness reprogramming exercise that you can create for yourself. It's one of Jeffrey Wolf Green's teachings. I will put the PDF to it on this slide afterwards. It just popped into consciousness for me, and it's something else that you can access. And so we won't only have traumas that come to the surface from the past. Sometimes we will re-experience or re-imprint the same trauma. You know, we keep repeating history till we're conscious and break free. We can have things, traumas come up again. And if they do, there's something that we are trying to understand and heal. We may also have new traumas happening for the first time. Remember the coronavirus contagion. That was a new trauma for many of us. Not that we haven't had past lives of viral and bacterial contagions that created massive, scale of death in the past. But, in our thousands of years of patriarchal distortions, meaning the power over power under of anima would be the better way to say it, male, female, we're still creating trauma all the time. One country, instigating war on another country creates trauma. And so the archetype of trauma is there in the present life as well as past. And the definition from EA, an intense disturbance caused by a shocking event or stress that has a lasting effect. And trauma can be spiritual, mental, emotional, physical. Spiritual trauma, our trusted guru that gets caught up in a sexual scandal or a financial scandal. So we can come on all 4 levels. And what happens when Saturn wants to suppress trauma, then it becomes subconscious and it dictates behavioral reactions. Why am I overreacting to this situation? It doesn't make sense, because in a past life, that same situation or pattern was life and death. And it's not this time, but the soul remembers it even if your conscious mind doesn't, and it has that same reaction. And that's why EA feels that about 85 to 90% of souls are born with past life trauma, or what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD can really come up throughout Pluto and Aquarius, really recognizing it for what it is, creating new modalities to heal it, as well as, again, experiencing new traumas that create PTSD. Aquarius is mental element, which is the air element. And so Aquarius relates to mental trauma. So all of these are going to surface and perhaps be in the news. Societally, we'll have to create ways for dealing with OCD, obsessive compulsive personality disorders, bipolar, sociopathic behaviors will, expand in the news, all kinds of neurosis or psychosis things. And because Aquarius is fixed air, that mental trauma, again, can be like the hamster on the wheel. It just circulates, circulates, circulates. So it really behooves us through Pluto and Aquarius to get off the hamster wheel mentally. And that means there must be a persistent effort to change any effects of trauma, both alternative and traditional therapies, working through it versus suppressing it. And so that means that, again, as we look at the past and all its details through this transit, it's going to be coming up. And it's going to have an effect on us in the present, and it's going to have an effect on us tomorrow. And so all of us must make an effort to evolve and break free. You don't even need astrology. You just can sit quietly with yourself and say, where am I most triggered? What is the pattern to that trigger? What can I do to address it, to heal it, to break free and evolve through it beyond it? Now, we also have collective trauma. As we talked about, World War II with the Jews, all of the Black race slavery. Where I live in the Northern Plains, our American Indian boarding schools have been in the news. Even our local community has been looking for the unmarked graves of the Indian children who passed, and they're in process of working to create a memorial for them to honor that healing. And chances are, however that memorial is going to be, building, museum, all kinds of collective things that they're working to do, those are going to be manifesting through Pluto and Aquarius. And of course, public mass shootings in the United States, anybody? That's current trauma. But are we just suppressing it? Are we just, numb to it, that we ignore it? Or with Pluto and Aquarius, will we stand up and say, enough is enough? And what can typically happen is consensus societies, as I said before, they may or may not understand the broader picture of certain cataclysmic events. And if there's an inability to understand it, we repeat it until enough of the consensus collective gets it and actually works to break the pattern. And just like I'd said before, groups of people can choose to reincarnate. We're going to have souls choosing to come through with Pluto and Aquarius. Some of them because they're traumatized and they need to individually heal. But we will also have the avant-garde mini generation of Pluto and Aquarius souls who come through to really initiate the Aquarian age and help us heal. And so the potential with Pluto and Aquarius for the next 2 decades is to make some progress with trauma. Enough of the collective that goes, wait a minute, it really is getting to the point that trying to power over, power under, that's a Pluto, Scorpio 8th house, trying to power over, power under other atomic countries just isn't making sense anymore for the masses. What we see happening with Russia and Ukraine, for example. So there is potential that consensus society may start to understand some of these past patterns and have that Aquarian light bulb effect and go, enough. We really don't need mass assault weapons in the United States. You know, they're war guns. We do not need them to hunt deer. Stay tuned. We'll probably have a mixture of it, as I'll show you. But one of the things about the Leo and Aquarius polarity and its distortions, any archetype in the zodiac can be distorted, patriarchal distortions especially, or it can be naturally expressed. One of the distortions of the Leo-Aquarius polarity is social inequality and elitism. Those social classes of haves and have-nots. Just like the wealth inequality through Pluto and Capricorn was so exacerbated, and even more so during the 3 years of the COVID virus, that can carry into Pluto and Aquarius. We're not guaranteed redistribution of wealth extremes. You know, the elites and the consensus powers that be that have the resources, they don't want to give them up. They don't want to share them. You know, look at how CEO salaries have, you know, started growing before Pluto and Capricorn, but we became a lot more aware of them, and it's becoming more and more in the news. And for instance, Biden even had the courage to say we should go after the CEOs of the banks that broke down because the Silicon Valley Bank that closed down, the CEO sold $3.5 billion worth of stock before it broke in the news. Stay tuned. We'll see if the masses address that in various countries. Time will tell. But throughout history, there have been periodically resets when the extremes are no longer sustainable. In ancient history, biblically, they were called debt jubilees. The pharaoh would eliminate the debt of the slaveholders when it got too intense, because it was how the pharaoh stayed in charge and kept the peace. So there can be massive uprisings through Pluto and Aquarius to redistribute resources and or change governmental institutions, policies, rules, laws, norms of how resources are distributed. The degrees of rebellions can relate to the degree that Pluto and Capricorn authority power grabs have taken over. There is a massive undertaking in the banking arena of trying to calm down everything so that nobody changes the laws. They want to be able to do their excessive gambling in various ways. Now, the intent of Aquarius is to create social equality and unity in diversity. The theme of the Aquarian age is unity in diversity. And oh, by the way, there is an astrologer alive on the planet who knows what the exact date is. The date varies. the Great Ages is the first day of spring, reversing through the skies of the constellations, 26,000 year cycle. Divided by 12, it means that that first day of spring has been going through the constellation of Pisces for about 2,100 years, and it reverses, so it's getting ready to leave Pisces and go into Aquarius for the next 2,000 years, more or less. No exact date, but even regardless, a 2,000-year cycle, we can have 200, 300, 400-year transitions. Just like transitioning from Capricorn to Aquarius isn't going to happen in 2 weeks. We're going to be looking at 2, 3, 4 years. And so this Aquarian age is a huge cycle that is upon us. And yes, Pluto's 2-decade transit through Aquarius can be part of really initiating that Aquarian age awareness, this growing awareness that we are not the only solar system with a live planet. How soon before we connect with another solar system and another live planet are they going to visit us? It will happen in the next 2,000 years. We just don't quite know when or how soon, and it might be shocking when it does. So when Pluto in Aquarius is trying to suppress something one more time, it means that Saturn, as the individuated consciousness, is trying to be secure. The soul and its ego is trying to be secure. And so anyone or anything that is threatening our security is going to be avoided, rejected, resisted, suppressed. Collective groups can resist change. And I, gave the example in the US of that single payer healthcare as a human right versus profiting from the sick. Or the one that's really in our face these days is the decline of white Christians and how nationalistic they have become. And they're fighting this word called wokeism and basically fighting the evolution of diversity in this country, which is going to happen regardless of how much they resist it. Stay tuned. We'll see. They're going to be brought along kicking and screaming, unless they all manage to succeed and leave the nation and settle into one tiny little state on their own. I don't think that will happen, but you get the example of how we fear change, and so we do everything we can in the present moment to resist. So one more time, then Aquarius archetype pushes what is suppressed back into consciousness until it's addressed. So what we want to do on a personal level is reflect. Where do I not want to change? Where am I just holding on? What am I ignoring in my life? What do I not want to look at? How can I individually make those changes according to how it is being presented to me personally, so that I can be a part of the wave creating change in the future? And one more time, this is actually of comfort. If you study astrology or you get little tidbits, you can just get triggered by the archetype of Uranus, Aquarius in the 11th house, and me with my words talking on these slides. But I want you to take comfort in this blueprint of the future, because our own soul pops up into consciousness again, where we are intended to move, to go, to evolve in the near future, meaning now, meaning in the next few months, near future, including the next 1 to 2 years. And yes, it can really threaten our current status quo if we keep getting this future-orientated message of seeing ourselves single when we're married and halfway across the country when we got a mortgage and, kids to raise, it can be pretty hard to move into that future. But if it's what's meant to be, it's going to happen one way or another. And so as we each get those future-orientated messages, when we make our best effort to act on them, we actually can minimize the trauma. We can minimize having it blow up in our face. And every single one of us gets these future-orientated messages. So how are they happening for you? What are you going to do? Well, here's what's typical. The 2 times that Pluto initiates into Aquarius is going to activate all 3 of those areas of the individuated unconsciousness. And it's going to be up to us how we each want to understand it and make the effort to change. There are typically 3 reactions to that evolutionary impulse to change. 1, we resist the karma and evolutionary requirements altogether. We just completely put our head in the sand or bury ourselves in the sand up to the neck. That tends to be rare to completely resist. We can totally go for it, wholeheartedly, no resistance whatsoever. I'm just going to throw away the past and jump ahead. That also tends to be rare. What typically happens is we are willing to change in some ways, and yet we resist changing in other ways. One more time, due to the fear of the unknown future and our security patternings. So you can reflect on this for yourself and recognize, oh, this is where I don't want to change. Oh, this is where it's a little easy to change. Okay, well, let's put some energy into the area that's easy, but let's also make that effort to address where we resist. And one more time, that's going to allow us to move through Pluto and Aquarius as smoothly as possible. So remember, this archetype in transit is about deconditioning from all our conditioning factors. Gender, parental, religious, societal, career, economic, etc., etc. And so we'll each have the individual areas where these different conditioning factors are coming up, and we have to move through. And remember, it takes courage to be a group of one and liberate into our unique individual soul nature. If you read anything about astrology, you learn that Aquarius, the 11th house and ruler Uranus, rules friends. It rules like-minded groups of people. But one of the things that EA teaches, you don't know which group to be a part of until you can stand on your own and individuate and be your own group of one. Then you will gravitate and initiate the interactions with the groups that are best for you. So Pluto and Aquarius, friendships can change. The groups we're involved with can change because we change. And so something that used to satisfy us doesn't anymore. And that's okay. That liberation, again, on that soul and egoic basis requires that courage, Leo, to be a group of one. However, Pluto in Aquarius is really going to stir the pot collectively because groups will fall into 3 different categories. Those who charge forward, the avant-garde rebels, progressive visionaries. This is Uranus ruling Aquarius in all of his future-orientated messaging. Those who defend the past, consensus consciousness, especially security conscious. This is Saturn, Capricorn. I'm comfortable. I don't want to change. And then we have those individuals who sway back and forth in the middle. Sometimes they're undecided. Sometimes they're just not paying attention. And there's some combination of Saturn and Uranus. Then that can be collective people as well. You know, because the United States has never-ending election cycles, they're always talking about the independent or undecided voter. There's an example for you of the group that, just isn't paying attention or doesn't care. And so evolution is always a continual interface between those three. Who's to bend in the past? Who wants to move our society forward? And who are all in the middle, just taking their own sweet time, kind of buoyed around by the winds of whatever's coming up and the news or collective popularity, etc. We can all make an effort, again, as we find our own sense of self, as we individuate, Pluto and Aquarius, we can consciously choose, this is how I want to be involved. Social activism will be quite energized through Pluto in Aquarius. And again, all three levels. So if you would like to see that unity and diversity on the planet, if you would like to see us how to get along as a group, a collective group on this planet, then activate yourself. Be a part of creating that change. Don't be the one in the middle who sways back and forth and lets everybody else do it. How are you choosing to be in the world what you wish to see in the world? A couple more things for you. Aquarius has rulership of the brain, the lining of the lungs. This is where the virus contagions come in. Has rulership of the central nervous system. All the synapses which fire electrical and messages in the brain, and what fires together wires together. And it co-rules the nervous system with Mercury in general. So Pluto in Aquarius can have a tendency to put all of us on edge. It's not just the unconscious past coming up into consciousness. It's also the fact that our nervous systems, our central nervous system, our general nervous system, they get more activated with this transit. We can get more on edge. It can mean that ability to exercise, that diet, exercise, and rest, get adequate sleep, will become more important. And when we're on edge, it can mean that the unconsciousness is picking up on something that's coming along, and we may be wanting to ignore it. And yet, Pluto in Aquarius is going to evolve us forward. Those dendrites in the brain are going to take on new knowledge. How open-minded can you be? How well can you entertain it? How can you make an effort to refire information and rewire something in your brain? It's a big, broad statement right there. So, my partners always leave me. How can we work on our own self-reliance and inner security so that we can change that and evolve into attracting a different type of partner? My bank account goes upside down. How can we work to refire our understandings of that and evolve beyond victimization, especially through Saturn and Pisces, so that we can energize differently and attract differently? So here's where we have to make the deliberate effort to change any crystallized thought patterns and old reality structures. Crystallized thought patterns, old reality structures, those are Capricorn words. So one more time, in general, there are Aquarian rebellions that follow any Capricorn outmoded crystallizations. We're going to go through it individually. We're going to go through it collectively. And so there can be, societies that go through major upheavals in various ways. Stay tuned. We'll all hear about them in the news, one way or another. Which country, Pluto and Capricorn, thinks that it can just invade and dominate another country coming along here? I don't need to repeat myself, but how many of us finally say enough is enough? So, Aquarius in general rules electricity, technology, inventions, like-minded groups. It has general rulership of astrology. Astrology might see a renaissance through Pluto and Aquarius. And this Pluto transit is going to take all of those areas and really leap them forward. Can you see how Pluto and Aquarius will change the whole electrical car situation? Can you see how it's going to leap technology forward in every single way you can know it or experience it in your life? This is something I've been saying before in talks on Uranus, and I put this into Pluto and Aquarius just to help us. This is the basics. Conventional versus quantum computing. Conventional computing is that little handheld calculator that we all used to have, and now we have one on our phone. They work on a binary system. They work with the letter 1 or 0, and so they store and compute with what we will call transistors, okay, to move things forward. And these transistors, we can put them and integrate them in various areas. Again, we got a calculator on our phone, but they go into our microwave, they go into our TV set, they go into countless things. It's amazing how many appliances are, have conventional transistors in them. But what's happened is they can only be made so small. Even though they could just be so minute, you need a microscope to see them actually working. I actually have a brother-in-law who works in this field, in the computing field with this. They can still only go so small. Well, what quantum computing does is it goes smaller yet. It works with atoms and subatomic particles, and it can store multiple values at the same time. It can go 1, 0, both of them, or anything in between. And so quantum mechanics allows all those computers, those integrated transistors, it allows them to work simultaneously instead of 1 plus 1. And the biggest example is light can be both a particle and a wave. The light of our soul can be the manifestation into this physical body, and it can be the immutable consciousness of the wave when we're non-physical. And so this shift from conventional to quantum computing is what's brought about the beginnings of artificial intelligence, or AI. So just think about Jupiter in 21 and Saturn in 21 and 22 transiting through Aquarius, and look at how the whole AI thing has come about, where now we have, AI computers. You give them a subject and they're going to write your PhD thesis, or take all of your examples of what you want to do to work with all that. This is going to explode through Pluto and Aquarius. And, we can, I'll discuss that a little bit in future Pluto Aquarius webinars, but here's the foundation of it. And here's the foundation to help you understand AI. And if you want a little more, for any of you who read Dan Brown's books, He published one, oh gosh, this was a few years ago. Gosh, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago by now. But in a fictionalized way, he explores creationism versus science. And the whole book is made up about AI computers. And so it could be a very good book if you would want a simplified way of really understanding what we're on the cusp of with the Aquarian age, because it will bring an interface between humans and computers and the great robots. But it will also create a huge science versus morality debate. And this will be very active through Pluto and Aquarius. And religion, which again is in that consensus consciousness, it tends to have a very Saturnian reaction. It tries to go back to the past. The Catholic priests who say women cannot be ordained. You know, take your religion and, just like the white Christian Protestant movement that has made Donald Trump into almost a guru. And he has nothing to do with the principles of what Jesus taught. But they use him for that ends justifying the means to hold on to the past, to hold on to their superiority. And so spirituality, and this is active with Neptune transiting Pisces for 14 years. Those dates are coming. Spirituality must adapt to evolving science. And unfortunately, what we have looked at is religion lags behind technology. And so how are we going to move through this science versus morality debate through the next 2 decades? And the other thing that's coming then with AI is it's bringing about what they call the metaverse, experiencing altered realities simultaneously. Many of us know it with those glasses you put on and you move around and you really feel that you have this sensory experience, but you've never left your chair. Or hopefully if you stood up, you didn't fall over your chair. Again, Pluto and Aquarius is just going to throw this totally up in the air. Stay tuned. Hopefully we can keep up with it all. Leroy and I were joking earlier today. Well, honey, we have a possibility of living through the next 2 decades. We're both in our mid-60s. I go, yeah, but I don't know how well we're going to keep up with the young bloods anymore, honey. At some point we're going to have nieces and nephews that, here, please program this for me. We already are in some of that, but we're all going to have to, choose how do we balance technology with natural law. And so do we completely go into that metaverse where we just ignore the four-leggeds and the flora and fauna that are out there? I hope not, but there can be those kind of distortions that will come through. It will be a very interesting 2 decades. Stay tuned. All right, so that's a lot of the archetypes. It may not be all. If there's something that I missed, you're welcome to bring it up for some questions or comments if you want. But I'm going to try and finish up these PowerPoint slides. I only put in the first 3 Pluto retrograde cycles, and that was mainly so you can see in 23 the highlight of any retrograde cycle is when the planet conjuncts or opposes the sun. It's the aha moment. This first retrograde cycle, Pluto is already back into Cancer, Capricorn, and that energy is, oh, this is just too shaky, 2.5 months in Aquarius. I want to go back to security here. But then we start to see, 1 degree, 2.5 degrees, Pluto slowly by a degree or two moving through the zodiac of Aquarius and polarity Leo when it's retrograde. What's interesting is this starts to give you a pattern of Pluto. Look at this. May 1st, May 2nd, May 4th, stationary direct. October 10th, October 11th, October 13th. You can see how much Pluto is starting to slow down in its stationary retrograde and stationary direct cycles. Remember, we said that Pluto was retrograde 5 months a year, 44% of the time. It means almost half the souls coming on to planet Earth are born with Pluto retrograde. They are born not accepting the status quo and trying to throw it off. So they will question consensus, and they'll do it regardless of the evolutionary state of consciousness. ES, we call it consensus, individuated, spirituated. They will do it relative to their own environmental conditionings, however you are on the planet in this current life. When Pluto goes retrograde 5 months of the year, we're all trying to throw off the past. That will be emphasized whenever Pluto is retrograde in Aquarius, which will be annually, 5 months out of the year. And it can cause us to retreat from the consensus sometimes. And to have Pluto do that for 5 months out of the year, it might be a little hard to keep track of on a conscious level. If you want to work with it on a deep level, it would be something that you would want to perhaps journal about. And especially journal around those dates that I gave you in the previous slide, that time period when Pluto goes retrograde, which is mid-spring, that has you really wanting to throw something off. And that time period when Pluto goes stationary direct, which, is right now, early October, mid-October, where you can see, oh, this is how I shifted over the summer. You might want to journal it. It will be more active when it goes direct or retrograde and direct. That's when things really become conscious. But when Pluto's retrograde, our souls are looking for an individual definition. This is who I am, as opposed to the consensus. So we go within, we withdraw so that we can listen to ourselves within. And retrograde doesn't allow us to resist. The resisting forces dissipate to a degree. So we can't stagnate. We can't crystallize. And when Pluto is retrograde, we have the sense of dissatisfaction. It's not going the way I want it to. What do I have to change? What do I have to shift in my life? And specific to Pluto retrograde, it emphasized the returning desires in the soul. What do I throw off, throw off, throw off? What do I let go of and eliminate with the separating desires? I really don't need this much stuff in my life coming off of Pluto Capricorn. Pluto retrograde accelerates that evolutionary process, which again is that returning desire to know source. And so when this happens, the Leo polarity of Aquarius is activated. And the sun and its rulership of Leo 5th house is passive fixed fire. It's that spark of life force. The fire element is spirit, and that's that life force. Spirit is life force. So it's that spark of life force that leads to the desire to create, to be, do, I exist. And all of us has a unique creative spark to contribute to the evolution of humanity. And so the intent when Pluto's retrograde in Aquarius is to break free from the traumas of the past and the resistance to change and find that courage to act, to evolve our lives. Again, Aquarius is fixed air, and so the distortion is remaining mentally stuck. We get the future-orientated messages, but we don't do anything about it. Pluto retrograde activates Leo to do something about it, to find that will to act. And because both Leo and Aquarius are of the fixed modality and they want to maintain, they build up energy until cataclysms occur. So listen to those future-orientated messages, change. And when Pluto goes stationary, retrograde, and stationary direct, change, change, change as best as you can. Pluto retrograde here is the intent to self-love. Leo is self-love, and it is emotional maturation because the archetype of Leo follows Cancer, and Cancer is emotional self-reliance. I rely on myself to meet all my emotional needs. And when we do that, we can emotionally mature and we can become self-responsible. And so this is coming off of both Cancer, Capricorn. How do I love myself better? How do I love myself better? Especially if you have any Aquarius traumas come up. How do I love myself better? And if we experience emotional immaturity and insecurity, we can tend to project the past forward. And so it's not unusual for us to do it to some degree. And that means to some degree, the wounds of our childhood may surface or be re-experienced. The classical is a bottomless pit and the need for love. And when that happens, we can even create those love affairs to feel like we're the center of the universe when we need to internally love ourselves deeper. We can create narcissism. We can create the starving artist syndrome. We can create anything and everything to take it back to us, Leo. So the drama, the attention grabbing, activities, words, and expressions. These are some of the distortions of that Leo polarity. And if they come up, again, they're all pointing to a need to love yourself better. So, evolution, Pluto, may require the drama Leo and trauma Aquarius events to force us inward, to self-reflect, self-love, to recognize that we are not the center of the universe, and to broaden, Aquarius, our ability to recognize fairness, equality, co-creation. It will be a time period to gravitate towards other like-minded souls for the courage to co-create, to support their creative ideas, to have them support our creative ideas. It is definitely there to support the younger generations being motivated to go, hey, we're not going to live long enough if you guys don't stop ruining the environment. One very prime example of, speaking up to co-create differently. And so, while Aquarius is the intent to recognize a larger picture, a collective situation, the Leo polarity is to understand our unique creative role, to honor and recognize each person's role in the play. How are each of us wanting to express our spark? And I said this before, but here it is on the screen. While most evolution is uniform, when Pluto turns stationary, retrograde, and direct, those are going to be specific time periods over a week or two, probably 2 to 3 weeks, week before, week after, of, things really popping into consciousness there where we can utilize this Leo polarity to, again, use our courage and will, Leo archetypes, to really change. I had this in from another slide. Can you see the spark, Leo, of universal source in everyone, everywhere? Can you honor it? Can you activate it? Can you see it in yourself? A source energy is helping you best activate it. All right, here's a little bit of the cycles for you. Here's the ingress chart of when Pluto goes into Aquarius the first time. Oh, see that concentration of planetary energy over here? And of course, I put the charts for Washington, D.C. Because I am a, mainly U.S. astrologer. But we have 5 planets in the dwarf planet Eris in Aries. Ooh, all these Aries planets right here. Major new beginnings, desire to bust forth. Will societies allow it to happen, or will they be forced to? Will the surprises come up? I really don't think we're done with the banking surprises. I got some slides on that again. But we also have Pluto, when it goes into Aquarius, square the nodes of the moon. South Node in Scorpio, shared resources of all kinds, the merging and intimacy with another. North Node in Taurus, how we evolve our own resources and how we have that inner relationship with ourself as much. Pluto squared the nodes and it's there almost the entire 12 months of 23. I think it's exact in late July. Pluto will be retrograde back into Capricorn, the nodes be in Aries, Libra. But Pluto square the nodes can sometimes be quite intense. And so changes might be traumatic. There might be some things that bubble up. Pay attention to your own future insights and watch that tendency with these fixed signs to want to cling to the past. And of course, we have a stellium, meaning more than a couple of planets, I call it a stellium when the north nodes evolve. The ego we're striving to create. South node is the ego of the past that we're trying to release and or evolve. But moving forward egoically, Venus in its own sign of Taurus, Uranus in Taurus, this is really breaking free in self-reliance inwardly. It is re-evaluating our resources and our values, and it's asking us to simplify in this changing world. And again, it's one of the reasons why I think we'll continue to have, various financial upsets. Stay tuned. So I'm briefly going to look at the 3 outer planets, and I'm going to start with Neptune interacting with Pluto. It's the spiritual evolution of humanity with this planetary pair. It's the largest cycle that we typically look at in astrology. I personally don't work with Eris yet. It's beyond Pluto. It itself has its own 500-year cycle, so it creates a huge cycle with Pluto. And so I just haven't been working with that yet. But it's our soul's desire, Pluto, to merge Neptune with whatever is considered the ultimate meaning and value in life, Neptune. Neptune is the collective conscious unconsciousness, the totality of it. So it's source energy. And so that desire to merge, it'll be different, whatever our evolutionary state of consciousness is. But it boils down into 2 things. Do we have inclusive values, natural law, giving, sharing, and including? Or do we have exclusive, which is the taking, hoarding, and excluding? You can see how that rules consensus so much in our world. And when that's distorted, then we substitute the material for inner values, for that relationship with source. And when we do, those separating forces, those separating desires, they want to maintain an addiction, Neptune, to the material world. So this is a long 500-year cycle. of spiritual evolution again. The last conjunctions were in the late 1890s, 3 times in early Gemini. Look what happened during that time period. Gemini, photography, electricity, telephone, the radio, and the TV. Holy moly, we have only come 130 years since they had their last conjunction, and look at the changes happening. Well, Pluto has that very elliptical orbit that I told you, 10 to 30 years through different signs. That means it can have certain aspects that repeat for decades, and this is the case. Neptune, 49 waxing sextiles to Pluto over, what is that, an 80-year time period. Every single person alive has Neptune in a waxing sextile to Pluto. In general, these waxing sextiles mean that on a collective soul basis, we are expanding in spiritual awareness. Neptune's ahead of Pluto. Oh, that can give us some hope. Well, we have 13 more of these waxing sextiles to go through, 26 to 32. Neptune's going to be in Aries while Pluto's in Aquarius. And so Neptune is going to go into Aries in 2025, which initiates a 165-year cycle of spiritual growth. So we're really going to start to have more rebellions again against our current Neptune in Pisces, clinging to the past of religious dogmas. Here's Neptune Pisces transit that we're in the latter years of. This is contributing to that trend. This is finishing up a 165-year cycle. This is contributing to more and more consensus societies, consensus groups of people that are turning away from human-made myths, the human-made religions. It's also why we have the more or less white Christian Protestants, evangelicals just freaking out because of the decline in religion that we have seen through Neptune in Pisces. This is probably happening all over the planet. We just may be hearing about it in the news more for us US inhabitants. But you can start to see these broader cycles of just old religious dogma breaking down. And so through Pluto and Aquarius, with the Neptune and Aries sextiles coming, there's a potential for rapid religious and spiritual growth that will catch up with our expanding global consciousness. We are becoming a global community, whether we want to or not. Climate change will be creating it, and so will the Aquarian age and Pluto's transit through Aquarius again. Wait until something from another solar system pops up on planet Earth. We don't know whether it's going to be friendly or not, but there will be, it'll start to make our fighting back and forth between countries look pretty childish. It's just that broader cycle of Neptune Pluto going on. Climate change, Neptune and Pisces, it's 14-year cycle. Look at how these Earth events have been changing beliefs around how we think we're having an effect on the climate. And so deep ethical ponderings are coming. Will Pluto and Aquarius bring the technological advances? They will have to by necessity. We will see all kinds of things explode in regards to green technologies. Will ethics keep up? I mean, I do have some hope. I read something recently where there is some technology coming out that they're capturing carbon and turning it into baking soda. They want to put it at the bottom of the earth, or the bottom of the oceans, excuse me. So there's a little bit of disagreement over that, but I'm like, I do have hope. I do really have hope that we could make some major technological advances for the climate through these two planets. Waxing sextiles are gross. They're moving forward for the most part. But the distortion, both of these archetypes can exacerbate geographical areas of haves and have-nots. As masses get displaced with rising sea levels, we have those who say, you can't come to our country. And what we have going on right now, where I live in a very small community in the northern plains of the United States, is this huge backlash against the East Coast and West Coast elites taking their wealth and coming here and buying up all of our housing. And they consider it a bargain while they're raising the valuations of our homes to where the local people can't even afford anything anymore. This is going on in multiple areas, but it's really starting to get pretty active here in my little neck of the woods. Sooner or later, though, I think through, Pluto and Aquarius and, Neptune ruling the totality of conscious unconsciousness. That means it rules all species. Source energy is everything. It's all species. And Neptune in Pisces, it rules water, but it rules nature on the ultimate level. And this is why Neptune in Pisces is having such these changes with climate change. And so, I don't even remember what the statistic is about how many people live near seashores and how many people are going to have to move and how this is going to just throw things up. Well, invention, necessity is the mother of all invention. Is that what it's called? That's going to be part of this planetary pair. But I said this before, one more time. I think that these two can bring back spiritual renaissances, that new age, that mystical side of any religions coming around, the holistic fairs that just resurface as they do periodically and come more and more and more into the mass consciousness. Just a tidbit for you. We could talk 2 hours on these two. With Pluto Uranus as a planetary pair, it's the soul's evolution, Pluto, of its individuated unconsciousness, Uranus. Again, that intent to decondition from the past, liberate ourselves in the present moment, and evolve into the future for our soul. They're 127-year cycle. You guys are going to know this one. They had 3 conjunctions in Virgo in the 60s. Yeah, were there any rebellions going on right then? Back then, I don't even have to go through the examples. They are probably enough in the collective consciousness, yes, yet that we can kind of understand how these two planetary archetypes really like to disrupt anything that is status quo or norm. Well, there were seed thoughts laid in the 60s that are starting to manifest. They've been manifesting for a while, but we go through these secular aspects that they have together, and there can be both negative and positive manifestations. But you can read on your screen just a few of the issues that were going on around that time period. The Vietnam War, they were already talking about climate change back then, the civil rights movement that was going on, the rebellions against governments and corporations. Computers were really, really starting to come into being at that point. They were more, mainframe computers. These were the seed thoughts of technology with Uranus and Pluto. Look at how far we've come since the middle 60s. I want to show you this visually. Evolutionary astrology, and I'm watching other astrology methods broadly start to work with this. We look at the cycle of phases and aspects from 0 to 360. There's a first quarter square, there's a last quarter square. The slower moving planet becomes stationary. The faster moving planet moves. I'm showing you, for instance, here was 1965, 66 with the Pluto conjunctions to Uranus. Well, Uranus in 2012-15, Obama's second term, was our first quarter squares. And that's a crisis in action. But it was back and forth between tomorrow and yesterday, and how there was, backlash to having a black president. We actually had Uranus make 7 biseptiles. This is a minor aspect, but it's a realignment aspect that we're just starting to get some glimpses of. This happened in, as you can see on your screen, between 18 and 21. This was the second half of Donald Trump's term. And this was where I've played with words myself. There was almost a little bit of numbness that set in, or rolling our eyes, but it was also where there started to be a turning point of going, more and more people starting to recognize, oh, we have a crazy narcissist. Well, the next one that's on the horizon is only a few years away. There's going to be 5 trines, a third of the way around the circle that Uranus will be from Pluto. And here's the dates and degrees that you'll have for your reference. It's going to be in early Gemini. Oh, do you remember Neptune and Pluto making 3 conjunctions in the 1890s at 7, 8, 9 degrees Gemini? Uranus is going to trigger that. It's going to trigger more technological growth. Trines, whether they're waxing or waning, there's 2 of them. There always rewards of prior efforts. Positive, making the effort. Negative, when we were a couch potato and didn't make an effort. And so various issues will make progress, while other topics will remain static or regress. And any lack of progress is going to be due to entrenched patriarchal distortions and authority figures clinging to their power. Pluto in Uranus' sign of rulership empowers more progress. So I think that we'll see major elections and almost across all countries, surprising authority figures, because mass consciousness is moving forward. There's younger generations that are more other oriented. They're going to be maturing. They're going to be voting in greater and greater masses. And climate change is going to have us going, I need sanity. I need security. I need things to really move with what is happening on the planet. And so while it doesn't always seem like progress is being made in near term, I do think that will be one of the more major intents and possibilities and manifestations of these first quarter trines that come along in the middle of this decade. Now, then we have another one that is, less than a decade away. That's going to happen 7 times. And this is where, the circle gets divided into the 8 phases. And whenever 2 planets together go through one of these lines and they go yang to yin, or they go yin to yang, when they change phases, these are major aspects. The sesquisquadrate is a square and a half. It's like having squares and oppositions again. And so this would be another time period, and it's a little far into the future to be projecting what will be happening. These 7 sesquisquadrates will all be in, they'll be in Gemini Cancer, while Pluto is moving through middle Aquarius. And I think they're going to create major events. It's going to require us, because the gibbous phase is self-analysis. It requires adjustments. So we're going to be most likely in the middle of the changing climate, and we either are solving it, or it's too late and we're warming up and living standards are changing all over the place. what's sustainable, what's non-sustainable, potential for major conflicts as countries cooperate or retreat in fear, as planetary consciousness one more time globalizes. It's coming. There's no way it is not coming. Now, I had this slide in before with the Saturn in Pisces. Remember the conjunctions of Jupiter, Saturn and Pluto back in 2020 when COVID hit? Well, Saturn is making 3 semi-squares, 45 degrees away from Pluto while it's in Pisces, and Pluto actually goes back and forth from Aquarius to Capricorn. But this is creating a new structure of consciousness, Pluto, within the soul. And as I'm very fond of saying, it happens to all of us. Doesn't matter what age you are, your soul evolves in manifestation, out of manifestation. So that crescent phase that Saturn's going to move into, it internalizes its yin phase, and it wants to build on new beginnings. Saturn in Pisces means it's got to deepen our spiritual foundations so we can be more adaptable to however the Pluto and Aquarius world is changing. And it means opening up to new realities, because Saturn in Pisces is going to break down old systems. And while they have these semi-squares, 45 degrees, Pluto's in the middle of the 2 retrograde cycles going back and forth, Capricorn, Aquarius, yesterday, tomorrow, etc. And so pay attention to how you are being asked to change your physical reality in your world. So briefly, here is the US, and I always bring this up for people because I do not use the USA chart from Jeffrey Green's original teachings. I did teach a school for 6 years, but I have moved on to Michael Munkasi's time period for July 4th, 1776. And here's the article that goes into more detail of what I talk about here. The research that has letters from Ben Franklin remembering the time that they all signed the Declaration of Independence. But what you can really recognize here, if you're new to the USA chart, is this chart has always had inclusive versus exclusive trends. Give me you're tired, you're hungry, you're poor, and build a wall. And it's the Mercury, communications, left brain, opposition to Pluto, the soul. You can add in the T-square of Chiron, are we wounding or helping? It has Sun, our creativity, our sense of identity, and Cancer, you know, mom and apple pie, square Saturn in Libra, Libra air, include, exclude, fairness, equality. And it has Mars in Gemini. We say this, but we do that. Square Neptune in Virgo. Neptune aspects can always create duplicity and confusion, but our Neptune in Virgo can also create our holier than thou, and we are the white Christian nation thing that's really rising up as we're watching this religious and spiritual diversity that's taking place in this country. And the fact that our Constitution is actually based upon religious freedom, not the other way around. Well, in the Minkasi chart, here is that Pluto return that happened for the first time 3 times, but Pluto made 5 oppositions to Mercury. That split in identity politics and the 2 political parties. Here's Neptune for the 2nd time opposing its natal position, and last quarter square to that natal Mars in Gemini. Here's those aspects. And then with the July 4th, 9:37 time, Saturn, structure of consciousness, going over the USA moon in Aquarius, which is the public identity. I think these Saturn moon conjunctions are what created the surprise in the midterm elections, with the majority of the voters having an Aquarius consciousness that said, I don't want to go backwards and relitigate, an election that was legal. And I don't want to elect some weirdos We want normality. We want to be able to progress, and we want to progress on, that equality of women's rights and the right to an abortion if we wanted one. So my point is that we are still in the midst of the third Pluto return. It only happened again 3 months ago. And this is going to be an influence we're going to feel for years, if not a couple decades. And if we go through history, when Pluto went into Aquarius the last time around in the 1780s and the 1790s, we came out with the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution that created things more fair and equal. We had all kinds of, various things that were passed that really were more egalitarian, even if we didn't quite totally live up to it. And even if it was a work in progress, even back then, it was still an improvement over what had happened before in England. And so here is a Pluto and Aquarius ingress that's going to happen in a couple of days. And this is Donald Trump's chart, just for a shift. He's not out of the news yet. Transiting Pluto is going to go back and forth over his sixth house. This is the Virgo house. This is the house of self-improvement, willingly or unwillingly. This is where we have crises in order to cause us to change. And if we're not willing to change and self-improve with the crises, this is the house that creates humility. And so he's got it back and forth 2 retrograde cycles. And then I just put this in for us, solar arc Pluto, where the planets move 1 degree solar arc. Sun moves a degree a day. We move every planet a degree a year with solar arcs. His solar arc Pluto is getting ready to square first quarter, crises in action. That's Saturn, Venus, and Cancer. Pluto in Capricorn, while it was having the USA return, was opposing his Saturn, Venus. And this has been the last couple of years where all the investigations into the laws he has broke have been coming out and coming out and coming out. And so Pluto in Aquarius is going to come along and say, no one is above the law. And it's going to be a test for our country and its democracy to be able to do that. And so I do feel that he's going to be indicted more than once. We're just watching the first one. It will have some people rising up in the streets, but it will take that mass consciousness, collective consciousness, Aquarius, and those in the middle, the independents, the barely informed, they're going to go, I don't want to be in crazy anymore. I've got to survive on the planet. I would really like to have things be better and more fair for me. So stay tuned. I think Pluto in Aquarius is going to have a few shocks for this gentleman. And we are not going to see Pluto in Aquarius oppose Donald Trump's natal Pluto till 2030. He will have 5 transiting Pluto oppositions in 2030 with 2 retrograde cycles. Will he be alive? Will he be in jail? I don't know. Stay tuned. We'll all get to find out. And so I just want to go over again, and here I am, about the same time as I was a week ago. A little bit of the current news that's going on. And I can go back to the USA chart as necessary, but you have to have your head in the sand to not recognize that there was a banking crisis in the US, and it happened right when Saturn went into Pisces. Again, you can refer back to the Saturn in Pisces webinar for some of those trends and how Saturn Pisces breaks down structures, Saturn, that are no longer sustainable. Pisces dissolves. And so here we are again with a little bit of a review for you. All right. And if this is too much detail, I don't quite get it. I did a free webinar. It's on YouTube titled The Populist Banking Revolution. I highly, highly recommend that you go back and watch it. It simplifies the history of banking and monetary policy, and it can be very helpful for you as Pluto goes into Aquarius and shakes things up, just as it did 15 years ago when Pluto went into Capricorn. So most banking today is called fractional reserve banking. And this is because many moons ago, the early goldsmiths that people would use as the store for their gold and silver before banks, they found out that people would only usually take out about 10% of their gold and silver. They'd have the other 90% that they just leave there. And so goldsmiths started lending out more fiat money, which is usually some form of paper, although it existed in other forms. They could start loaning out more money and receive interest on that loan than what they actually kept in their vaults. And this fast forwards today to where typically banks were meant to follow this historical trend, which may change with time. But if you have 10% in reserves, you can take $100 and you can lend it out 10 times, and you can lend out 1,000. You can lend out more than what you have. Banks today typically keep reserve ratios of 3 to 5%, some are less. But guess what happens if we have a panic and the public runs into fear that they're not going to be able to get their money out? It creates a run on the banks, and it collapses the banks when they do not have enough reserves to cover the customer deposits being withdrawn on demand. This is what happened in the 1930s when we went through not only the Dust Bowl climate-wise, where I live up on the northern plains, but it's also when the public was taking out loans and gambling with it to earn interest, and everything collapsed. And the bank runs were blown apart. Well, I just read a very interesting article, and I don't remember where. I've been reading a lot on this banking thing, trying to do my next wave of education, self-education. I got more slides on that for you. But Roosevelt, FDR, back in the 1930s, when they started having a run on the banks, he did a bank holiday. He closed down every single bank in the country in the early 30s. So nobody could draw out their money. And he did not let the banks reopen until banking regulators had went through each and every bank and decided if they were stable enough to remain in business. And if not, they were taken over by the federal government and sold to a healthier bank. Anyway, there's more to the things that FDR did at that time period. Fascinating if you want to do some Google research on that. But this is what we basically had happen 2 weeks ago when Saturn went into Pisces. And so banking in general is also known as public versus private central banking. In other words, it's a central bank that all the other banks work with. So central banks are a non-commercial bank, which may or may not be independent of government with the following functions: monetary policy, stability of the system. They issue the currency notes. They act as a banker to the government. They supervise all the other financial institutions or banks. They regulate payment systems. Well, what happens here is private central banks and private banks, okay, their profits generated from their loans with their bank credit go back to them, goes to the CEOs and the shareholders, versus public banks such as credit unions and sometimes small community banks, sometimes land banks, mostly credit unions right now. These public banks, their credit and their profits are returned back to the public. They're returned back to taxpayers and citizens. The youth, elderly, they're put into infrastructure. They're put into a very broad mission of trying to keep the bank stable. What we're having happen right now is we've got private banks basically doing a little bit of gambling, and they're getting caught with their pants down. Well, one more thing to understand is in 1913, the US passed the Federal Reserve Act. So the US has a long history of battling. Remember that include exclude that I showed you with the USA chart? There's a long history between, are we going to have a public central bank, US government, or a private central bank? So if you want more details on this, this is a great book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, because the US and European financial elites met on Jekyll Island, Georgia, and crafted the legislation of the Federal Reserve Act. And they passed it just before Christmas in 1913. And what it did is it turned over the US Treasury's right to monitor money, to coin money and bills, and gave it to a private nonprofit institution called the Federal Reserve. And it is owned 100%. There's 12 branches to the Federal Reserve. They are 100% owned by their member private banks. Now, they loan money to the government and has to be paid back with interest. Oh, that debt that everybody keeps talking about? What if the Federal Reserve loaned money to the government at 0% interest? That's another subject. However, in recent history, I didn't have time to figure out the date. Let me make a note here and see if I can still get that date. Sometime in more recent history, let's say within the last few decades, Congress actually passed a law that the Federal Reserve must return profits back to the US Treasury on an annual basis. They return back tens of millions each year. However, there's no congressional oversight and there's no audits. In the United States, we do not audit the Pentagon and we do not audit the Federal Reserve. Those are the only two, quote unquote, entities on a federal level that are not audited. We take them at their word of what they have as a profit. And so here is that chart for the Federal Reserve Act that was passed December 1913, 6:02 p.m. Washington. We actually have a pretty legitimate chart and a time for the chart here. And so this is when we gave away the power to coin money. 12th house Pluto, the deception of what was going on with a polarity to the sun, the Federal Reserve taking that Capricorn authority and control over resources. I won't take time to go into other things. You've got the chart if you're a budding astrologer and want to study this, but here it is with the Minkesi chart. All I want you to do is look at the fact that wherever you see a red circle, that's archetypes in the Fed chart hitting the USA chart, and they represent power grabs, control, or sleight of hand with what we're going to do versus what we did. And again, up until 1913, the US government coined its own coins and printed its own bills. And there's a lot of, various ways in which that's changed over the years. But the Federal Reserve Act took it away from the government and turned public central banking into private central banking. What is interesting, if you look at the blue lines, in 2026, 28, remember that's when transiting Uranus is going to make waxing trines to Pluto. Uranus will be in Gemini. Well, that transiting Pluto is going to go over the Fed's Aquarius and this south node of the USA chart. And I wonder if the public will wake up to the Federal Reserve right here. They're trying to not let it out that they got really lax in their banking oversight. Remember, they're supposed to make sure that the banks are what would I say, not valid, but that they're, say again?
Stress tested.
Stress tests, yes, that the banks can handle and that they have enough, capital to be liquid when people want their money back. And so is the public going to wake up to that? Are we going to have more banking trauma here if we have a sleight of hand and they do all these things behind the scene, making us think that the public, that the banking system is stable when perhaps it is not? The best intent would be the public taking back their monetary power, meaning going with public banking systems versus the private banks that, the major too big to fail banks that are outrageously paying CEOs. Here's a tri-wheel to show you where Pluto, here's transiting Pluto going right through there if you want. I just think that there's going to be more risk to be exposed here. Will it happen the end of this week when Pluto goes into Aquarius the first time? Will it happen next year? Will it happen, over the next few years? The way we have our laws regulating banks in this country are not very stable. And as long as these interest rates have been low, things have been going along pretty good. But as the feds have been raising interest rates to try and control inflation, it's not going so well. And the banks that have made risky bets, coming up in a slide, they're again being caught with their pants down. Again, this is not beginner's charts, so I'm just going to gloss over it time-wise. But after we had the banking fiasco, 2008, 2009, Pluto in Capricorn, and, taxpayers put a bit of money in bailing out banks, in 2010, the Dodd-Frank Act was passed to tighten regulations for SIFIs, systematically important financial institutions. That meant banks with more than 50 billion in assets had to have annual liquidity stress tests, that they weren't taking that fractional reserve of assets down to 1% and they, couldn't pay back deposits. Well, in 2018, Congress changed the cutoff from 50 billion to 250 billion. There were Democrats that voted for it. They were minorities in both houses, and all the progressive Democrats were against it. Your Elizabeth Warrens and your Bernie Sanders and others, they're public banking advocates, which I'll show you in a bit. Well, here's the two banks that went under. Now, their press is that even if Congress wouldn't have changed the 2018 back off, they still could have went under, and that's true. but they probably could have caught them a little bit easier. And so what we had happen right now, right in between Saturn, Pisces, and Pluto, Aquarius, U.S. Treasury, Federal Reserve, remember them, FDIC, they all stepped in to guarantee the deposits of all customers of these two banks versus only guaranteeing deposits up to 250,000, which usually covers most of your customers in the bank. And so they can't do that for every single bank in the country. It's just it's mathematically impossible, even if you do want to print money. So what they've stepped in to do is really not a solution. And this is why there's still a vulnerability out here in the banking system. So yes, there were several issues that created a run on the bank for these two. Biggest one, interest rate derivatives, gambling and betting on interest rates going up and down, not keeping enough reserves, not keeping that 10% or even 20% in reserves so that customers could get their cash when they wanted it. These two particular banks were banking and going into lending and betting with the cryptocurrency market, which has been pretty volatile itself. And that populist banking revolution video on YouTube I told you about, I do go into pros and cons of cryptocurrencies. You can go to that YouTube video to see that. But what we really have going on here, down to the last three sides, is what we call the shadow banking system, derivatives. And they are basically what we call leveraged speculation. In other words, borrowing money to gamble. Again, this is what happened in the 1930s. And they didn't have derivatives back there, and I can't remember for sure what it was, but people were taking out, they were taking out loans to gamble in the stock market. And it was the stock market that went kaput back in the 1930s that just brought the house of cards down. Well, derivatives, it's a complicated subject, but it's really financial intermediary, it's financial groups, institutions, even financial banks, okay, that facilitate creation of credit. Remember what I said? 10% reserves, $100 can be loaned out 10 times, and then supposedly you're going to get it back with interest. So they making loans to do what we call interest rate derivatives, betting that the rate will go up, betting that the rate will go down. Well, there are some of these bets that have been taken where they didn't think the interest rates would go up. They didn't think the Federal Reserve would raise them so much. And so now they're all exposed to interest rate shocks, meaning their bets are coming due and they owe more money than they were loaned out. In other words, they're not receiving extra on the loan, they're paying extra on the loan. Crashes it down. And so there's a lot of these variable rate contracts on interest rate derivatives that are coming due in the next year, the next 2 years. Oh, I forgot to take this slide out. Sorry about that. This was my part of expanding my talking on it more than anything. So the 2008-9 crisis was created by mortgage securities derivatives, where everybody was sold a house and they would bundle that up and sell it to the next person, gambling that they would make more money on the mortgage interest when the mortgages were repaid, until the mortgage system crashed and people couldn't keep their houses, and it brought down the banking system because banks go out into this what's called shadow banking system and start gambling, which I don't even know why it's legal. And this part doesn't make it into the news. And so I will tell you where you can read more on this. But what can we do? I've been preaching this for 15 years since Pluto went into Capricorn. We only have one public bank in the US. We have one in Samoa or something like that that was recently created. But the Bank of North Dakota 100 years ago created a state-owned bank, and it acts like a mini central bank. And it mandates that all of the state's revenues and all its cash must go into its own bank, not go to Wall Street, not go anywhere else. And then they loan out their own assets, the fractional reserves, and they keep the interest when it comes back. Now, I tried to find a more updated version of how much cash they're sitting on. Uh, but I couldn't find that. I'll keep looking to see if I can, because I'm really curious. Was coming up with 10 billion in assets, but I didn't know if that meant 10 billion in cash or not. It's been growing exponentially in the last couple of years. But they came through 2008 and 9 with no, I don't know if they had defaults. They were very rare. They continue lowest foreclosure rates in the country on loans, credit card defaults, student loan defaults, unemployment rates. They continue to be the lowest there is. North Dakota has more banks per capita than any other because BND partners with the private banks and they buy up their loans so these banks can lend out more at lower interest rates, and they do it very stably. Their money doesn't go into derivatives to make wild gambles. And BND for the last 2 decades has had record profits. They average 12 to 18% annual profits. And so when this bank or when this state, and I remember this when the Red River in the eastern part of the state flooded, and it caused huge infrastructure issues. Bank of North Dakota just went in with its own cash and cleaned everything up immediately, put everybody to work immediately and took care of it. And then when the feds declared a disaster, the Bank of North Dakota got reimbursed. So there is today infrastructure for cities and states. About 40% of the cost is interest. And so there's this public banking movement that's taking off. It's been around longer than Pluto and Capricorn, but I've been preaching it for 15 years. Publicbankinginstitute.org. So there's this movement that's been gaining, grassroots understanding and movement to go, if we create public banks and that money comes back to us, again, we have money to build bridges. We have money to, repair our failing water and sewer supplies. We could even have money to pay for, the nursing home shortage that we're going to be having to take care of over the next 2 decades of Pluto and Aquarius. So what can you do? You can go to this organization. They have some real short videos to simplify what I've been saying. You can put your cash and assets in credit unions, which must give the money back to shareholders. They do not pay out they do not pay out massive salaries to CEOs. Check on the community bank. Some do, some don't. Okay. Here's my heroine, Ellen Brown. That's where a lot of this information comes from. Here's her new book, which also includes cryptocurrency pros and cons. Here's her 2 latest articles right here. They're not beginners, but you can go read them if you want. This is where a lot of what I've said today came through. I didn't talk about bail-ins, okay? That's something to understand. Here's an article that came out today by Vice News. Private banks are in a crisis. What if they were public banks? Excellent, excellent article. And I thank you, Leroy, for sending that to me today. They quote Ellen Brown, they quote the Public Banking Institute, and they had some of the latest facts. There are 37 states in the US that have some type of public banking movement going on. And as we see more of these banks at risk and more banks fail, I think Kim Marie might actually see her forecast of public banking come into manifestation. And when it does, it stabilizes resources for all of us. And it gives all of us a chance to have fairness, to, rebirth this infrastructure in our country as well as others. The public banking, you will not see the German banks have financial crises because something like 3/4 of their banking is public. It varies with Japan, it varies with Canada, it varies with Australia. Those are countries that have went in and out of public versus private central banking. And of course, the banking elites have really been trying to turn everything private. And I'm just, I really am hopeful that these Pluto in Aquarius revelations will jumpstart this public banking movement. Thank you for allowing me to go over time-wise. I'm rattled. Again, you will look for an email from us to get the PDF on this to come to you in just a little bit. My next public webinar is a free Mercury retrograde next month. Oh, and I will be speaking at NORWAC this year, and my subject will be the Great Ingress Decade, Pluto in Aquarius, Neptune in Aries, Uranus in Gemini, Chiron in Taurus. There's a lot of planetary change, not just the two that I've spoken about. Comments or questions from anybody? Again, you'll have this to refer to and listen to again if it's been overwhelming. Thank you for allowing me to just rattle off information.
Yep, you did plenty. There's really no other
All
question.
right.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And all the best to you. And again, pay attention to your own future-orientated messages, revealing to you how to move best for your highest and best good. How to move forward, excuse me, for your highest and best good. All right, everybody. Until next time.